Hey everyone, this is Greg, your host of Goddamn Gamecube. Thank you for tuning in to Season 2. All episodes in this season were conducted virtually over the internet because of the coronavirus pandemic, so please excuse any audio glitches or oddities you may hear during these episodes. Thank you and enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Goddamn Gamecube, the best goddamn video game podcast there is. My name is Greg, I'm your host today. We are back with part 2 of Final Fantasy March Madness, where we are going to decide as a podcast consensus of what the best Final Fantasy game is. We reduced it down from 16 to 8, so we're going to start with the quarterfinals. And let's start this off with a softball here. Welcome, guys.
We right into it.
Yeah, we have Nick, Will, and Alex are back. So let's just rip this Band-Aid off here. This one's gonna be pretty easy.
Here we go.
Yeah. So the first quarterfinal matchup is Final Fantasy VIII versus Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles.
Oh.
So
it was gonna be.
That's great.
Yeah, it was gonna happen eventually. So we don't have to. We don't have to make the demise of Crystal Chronicles too long.
Yeah, you're right. Let's just call Crystal Chronicles the winner and move on.
Yeah. Come on. Why do we have to argue about it? Crystal Chronicles is going to move on now.
Best gameplay, best story.
So here's what we're gonna do. So I'm assuming Final Fantasy VIII is gonna move on. So here's what's gonna happen. Nick, I'd like you to say, why don't you give Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles a nice eulogy, and Will, why don't you say some nice things about Final Fantasy VIII when he's done, and then we'll go from there.
All right. Well, so Crystal Chronicles, honestly, it gets memed on. This game isn't terrible. I mean, we picked it over Final Fantasy 13, so I don't think this game is awful. It's pretty good. You know, it's a pretty good game. Like, especially, I think where it really shined was not with the remake, but way back when you could play co-op. Although playing co-op was a pain in the ass. You needed the Game Boy Advance, whatever, cables.
Yep.
But apparently the co-op was awesome, and that's what made the game great. I do think the game is fun. Like, it's extremely different from any other Final Fantasy, even the spin-offs. And I kind of appreciate that. That it was just totally a different experience. I couldn't really tell you anything good about the story because I don't remember it, to be totally honest with you. But I thought playing the game was fun. I liked your little Moogle companion or whatever he is, the little flying dude who held the chalice for you if you're not playing co-op. I liked that whole, you got to put the chalice down, get rid of the miasma, fight the things off, get it again. I don't know. I thought it was unique, kind of cute. A very different way to experience the game. And honestly, being able to play as the little Moogle-like guys who happen to be the tanks is really funny. Like the smallest dudes are the strongest guys, and they like to eat steak and potatoes, which I thought was very funny. But,
I mean, listen, it's a cute game.
Yeah.
Let's do this. Will, why don't you say a couple of things about Final Fantasy VIII, then we'll have Alex say a couple of words. We don't have to go too in depth because I mean, I'm sure you'll have to unload a heartfelt argument for Final Fantasy VIII in the next round. So just say a couple of words.
Yeah, I can make it quick. I mean, to add on to what Nick said, like one thing that was really cool about Crystal Chronicles 2 was like you could use the Game Boy Advance, which we can all agree is a cool system.
Yeah,
and that connectivity was cool. Cool little thing there. So yeah, I can say that. I mean, Final Fantasy VIII, we're going to be saying more about it later. So I mean, it's one of the best. It ranks up there in terms of the whole series. So. We'll definitely have plenty to say later on it, but it's definitely a very good game, and definitely would put it above Crystal Chronicles if I had to play one. Not to say that either of them are Crystal Chronicles is bad, but we all know what's going on here.
Yeah, Alex, this is Final Fantasy VIII is your game, so I think. Listen, why don't you just say like a sentence, because I know you're going to have an impassioned speech later down the road.
Yes. Yeah, like I have an impending scene later, like at the end of Glory, no spoilers for the movie Glory, where I'm going up the hill and I'm having this doomed battle. I know it's going to happen, so I'm just going to say, compared to Crystal Chronicles, 8 has a functional story and a functional leveling system, so by and large, it defeats Crystal Chronicles. So,
dude, honestly, pretty good movie, too. I like that movie.
Oh, for sure.
Anyway, Final Fantasy VIII moves on. That's a softball.
R.I.P. Crystal Chronicles.
We're gonna move on to another softball.
No.
We've got Final Fantasy 1 versus Final Fantasy 7
My God.
as our quarterfinal
Wow.
matchup here. This
Man.
is just, I mean, sometimes when you're the 7 seed and like, in
It's
the
tough.
1 seed, you're just not going to survive.
It's a cool matchup though, because you got like the first one and
Yeah.
then like the really big break for the
Yeah.
series. So interesting.
So I mean, this is another obvious one where Final Fantasy VII is, unless anyone has a very compelling argument why Final Fantasy 1 is better than 7, which I don't really think there is one.
I don't think it's possible.
I mean, let's do this. Why don't Will, if you want to start, why don't you say something nice about Final Fantasy 1 before we bury it?
Sure. I mean, I'll say one thing here, and
Sure.
if nothing else, like if you look at Final Fantasy 1 and Final Fantasy 7 like back to back, it really just goes to show you how like core the fundamentals of these games are, and that even though they've done like a lot of different iterations and kind of vamps on the theme of their different systems, it's really just the same core stuff, and it's really strong, and it was strong from the beginning, and that's why people loved it. And it's Final Fantasy 1's a solid game, classic for choose your party, go out and save the world, travel to 4 different continents, and fairly solid. Obviously, can't compare to the experience of 7. 7 was on the PlayStation, like just miles of difference there for so many reasons. So, you can't knock it.
No, I agree. I think this is just one of those unfortunate casualties of going head to head. Where, I mean, I think Final Fantasy 1 is a good game, and you can't. It's one of those things where, like, it's how can you knock where the franchise started if you liked it? You know what I mean?
I mean, there wouldn't be a 7 without
exactly.
1.
There wouldn't be a 7 without a 1. So Nick, why don't you say something nice about Final Fantasy 1?
Yeah, I've got some good memories of Final Fantasy 1. Greg, it may have been the very first JRPG we ever played. I know Breath of Fire and those other ones came out around the same time, but the same 2003, whenever the Game Boy Advance
referring
one
to
came out?
the Game Boy Advance
Game Boy
remix,
Advance
but
one.
yeah.
Yes, Dawn of Souls. Like, this was probably my introduction to this kind of game, Final Fantasy 1, Dawn of Souls, and the Game Boy Advance. And for better or for worse, it made me love this genre.
Yeah.
And it started my love for it, and honestly, it's a pretty solid game, and I think it goes without saying, it's the game, at least I think it was also remade for PSP. It still holds up today. So if anyone's listening to this, I recommend you play it. Like, it's worth playing Final Fantasy 1 today. And actually, I do want to say something kind of cool.
Sure.
With it being my first Final Fantasy game, now in this Dawn of Souls remake, when you beat one of the crystal bosses, like little shrines opened up that weren't in the original game. If you fought through the shrines, you ended up facing these bosses. And they seemed crazy to me. I'm like, what are all these bosses? They're actually bosses from future Final Fantasy games. So in a way, I got to experience a lot of those bosses in Final Fantasy 1 when I first played it in like 2003 or whenever it came out. And then when I get to those bosses later in the series, I'm like, oh, hey, what's up? I fought this guy before. It's a nice
cute.
little memory for me. But yeah, it's going to go out here, but props to Final Fantasy 1. They did a great job on the Dawn of Souls remake too. It's a good game. If you're a fan of this series or JRPGs in general and you haven't played it, I'd give it a shot. It's a good game.
So Alex, before we move on here and bury Final Fantasy 1, I want to ask you something. Here's what I want you to do. Everybody loves Final Fantasy 7. I want you to tell us one bad thing about it. Like if it had to lose this matchup, which it won't.
Well, that's a really good question. What is a bad thing about Final Fantasy VII? I will say this. I think, considering where video games were back in 1997, it was mostly kids. Like, it's not today where it's played by 12-year-olds to 40-year-olds. It wasn't a huge age range. To make Vincent Valentine and Yuffie behind these mega secret choices and putting them behind areas that, if you didn't have a strategy guide, which cost like $20-25 back then, which for a 12-year-old is a lot of money.
Yep.
You probably couldn't figure out, and you would lose out on part of the game. And that goes back to that era of games where, like the Zelda games, there are secrets that no one uncovered for years, and it was sort of a part of video game making back then with what like big budget games did. But still, it's like there's such integral parts of the story and the experience that why would you put them behind such a difficult wall of tasks, I guess.
Yeah, you know what? That's a great critique.
That's
well
awesome.
done.
Yeah, that's an awesome critique. I agree.
I like that.
I played Final Fantasy VII when I was older. I didn't play it when it came out, and when I got to those Yuffie and Vincent parts, I'm like, how would 12-year-old me have figured this out? 23 or however old I was figured it out, but 10 years before, I don't think I would have been able to. And you're right. Yeah. They unlock some pretty cool stuff that you really shouldn't miss in a playthrough of the game. So that's a good critique. Nice job.
Okay, let's go on to a harder one here. We're going to move on to the other side of the bracket. In this quarterfinal, let's talk about Final Fantasy Tactics versus Final Fantasy IX.
Oh, interesting one. Interesting. Okay.
So I don't know if someone wants to start, but I mean, now, correct me if I'm wrong. Final Fantasy IX was a PlayStation 1 game. Is that right?
Yes.
Yep.
That's right.
It was. So, I mean, okay, we've got two colossi of, like, the PlayStation 1. So, I mean, Will, why don't you start?
Okay, sure. So... Final Fantasy IX. We had some talk about Final Fantasy IX. Great game, obviously. I think I remember saying it was probably like, in terms of that battle system going up to that time, probably the most fun to play. The weapon skill learning system was really fun. Actually similar to Tactics. It came out around the same time. So I also stated last time that this game was kind of like the first one where they were kind of looking back and doing sort of a brand review and like looking at all the great things, but sort of a celebration of what Final Fantasy was. Final Fantasy VIII was way out there comparatively, so they kind of took this one and brought back all like the trappings of Final Fantasy. And it was very cool and fun and awesome and quirky. Final Fantasy Tactics actually did kind of something similar, but not consciously. They took all the trappings of Final Fantasy and you had all that cool stuff like the crystals and your party and all the jobs, the guy named Sid.
Yep.
And they put that in the context of this really dark, sad kind of like story. They gave you that really, it was pretty innovative, isometric tactical system, really difficult game, really serious game. So like this was a much different experience, but overall, just the weight of the plot, the challenge of the gameplay, just the overall atmosphere and Final Fantasy-ness of it all, I think wins. It's a classic game. It's a landmark in RPGs in general. And Final Fantasy IX, while, extremely good in its own right, in my mind, I would take Final Fantasy Tactics if you had to ask me whether I'd play one right now, just to experience that. Again, it's, you can play it over and over again and kind of do it a different way or like notice new things. So yeah, I would probably give Final Fantasy Tactics the winner on this one.
Nick, do you have a rebuttal to that or do you agree? Go ahead.
Sure. So I think I may have hinted at this last time. I mean, it took Alex's filibuster to make me switch from 4 to 9. So I think you guys can assume my initial thought of Final Fantasy 9 are not the highest. I do like the game. I think it's very good. It was the most recent Final Fantasy I've played, like totally new. I do really like it. I think it's a great game, but I think this might be a hot take. I'm not really sure. I hate Zidane. I think he's the worst. He's the absolute worst main character in the series. I hate him. I don't know if they built him to be unlikable, but if they were going for that, they did a good job. I did not like him at all. I think his redemption arc is good. Don't get me wrong. I think by the end of the game, he becomes a likable character. But like, man, he's one of the only main characters I actively wanted to take out of my main party, and I could not do that. Honestly, just did not like him. Or maybe that's speaking of a strength to the rest of the characters too, where everybody else is so much more interesting. I wanted to use them instead. But that's really my take on 9. I think it's a good game. I really do. I think I would have appreciated it more if I had played it when it came out, unfortunately, but I didn't. So I think I don't need to rehash what Will said, but I'm a lover of all things Tactics. Final Fantasy Tactics is one of my all-time favorites, and I have to give this one to Tactics.
Okay. So, Alex, even though I believe it's already 2-0, if you have anything to speak on either title, go ahead before we, because it is 2-0, so I believe we do have to move on no matter what, but go ahead.
Yeah, I know Tactics is a beloved entry in the series. I unfortunately never experienced it. I get the impression that I probably would pick Tactics if I had experience over 9, but because I have played 9 and enjoyed it, I'll pick it as the lame duck pick here.
Sure.
And I just, parting thoughts, I really appreciate while I love 7/8's customizability of your characters, I do love these like set classes for the specific characters, and they're sort of like very specific, like VV being a black mage, like we said. It kind of like makes them feel like a living, breathing character, and just the art style was always captivating for me. So my parting thoughts for our dearly beloved 9.
Hey man, I agree with that, man. I like 9. I think that's a good point too, where it gives them a lot more character to know that they're in one class. You can't really change it. You can't have VV swing a sword. He just doesn't do it. And I do like that about the game. It's unfortunate. It's a tough draw for 9, but yeah, tough draw. I mean, hey, when you go head to head, these are going to happen. Yep. So we're going to put Final Fantasy 9 to bed. Tactics is going to move on. I think this last quarterfinal matchup here is probably the most interesting one. So we have Final Fantasy 3 versus Final Fantasy 6. Okay.
Actually, Alex, do you want to start? We'll go in reverse order.
We absolutely can. I really don't have much to contribute here. I have never played 3, and 6 is the classic. So just going with that. Like that's really all I have to contribute here.
Okay, so you're putting 6 forward, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Okay, why don't we go to Will next?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'll say is like, it is an absolute crime that Final Fantasy III got the remake 3D treatment, glorious DS treatment, and Final Fantasy VI has yet, that I know of, to receive such treatment.
Yeah, right?
Anything,
What the hell?
Right?
Has it even gotten did it even get a GBA release?
No.
6 did get a GBA release.
It did?
Yeah, but we technically do own it, but I think it was later than the rest of them.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
I kind of hope that Square doesn't touch it now, because like I wouldn't want them to give it like the 7 remix treatment. I don't think that game would deserve that. I mean, obviously 6 it was just a progression in every sense from everything that had come before it. They took everything that was good about pretty much all of the games up until then and just gave it this really awesome story and added in some really interesting characters and gave it the music. Like it was like the big budget Final Fantasy kind of realized for the system. And 3, by comparison, while it was a great refinement of a lot of the systems, it really didn't offer like a huge amount of like new stuff to draw in like someone who had never heard of Final Fantasy. 6 was really when it started blowing up, and for good reason. There was a lot more to latch onto in that game than there was in 3. If you were an RPG fan, then definitely go back and play 3, because it's a challenge. It's really hard. The remake of it is pretty good, but 6 just has so much more going for it, from the gameplay to the story to the characters. So get into 6.
Yeah, so Nick, we've encountered another, I forget who said this, another lame duck vote here, because it's already 2-0. So Nick, it's your choice. I mean, you can either sing the praises of Final Fantasy 6 or you can write the eulogy for 3, but 6 is going to move on.
Oh man, I got to talk about 3. Okay.
Go ahead.
All right, so I told you guys in the last episode, Final Fantasy 3, the remake on DS, is a guilty pleasure of mine. I don't know why I play this game so much. I really don't. I think it's fun. It's extremely hard, but I got to tell you all the really stupid shit it did and why I don't know why they did it.
Sure.
Okay. So I don't know why Phoenix Downs aren't viable. That is so stupid.
That's right. Yep.
I did a quick scan through earlier today. I was like, okay, Phoenix Downs aren't viable. How many do you actually get throughout the game? You get like 30 of them in chests. That's it.
Wow.
You can get them from winning battles and stealing them and whatever, but you really only get about 30 of them. But so the game relies on you reviving people in towns at these like pawns, which is like fine. It's free to do it, but doesn't fucking help you if your dudes die in a dungeon.
Right.
And you don't get the white magic spell to revive people until like halfway through the game. So you can just leave yourself totally fucked.
Yeah.
So that's a system that I don't really understand why they did it. I don't understand why they made the magic system the way they did it, where every single level has a certain amount of uses. You don't have MP.
Old school
Like you have,
D&D.
Yeah.
like you have 10 uses of level 1, 5 uses of level 2, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
Ordinarily, I don't mind that. There's no way to recover MP outside of elixirs. You can't do it. So if you're in a dungeon trying to use magic, I want to cast Blizzaga on this guy. I've got 2 uses. You're never fucking getting it back until you go rest. Sorry, man.
Yeah.
It's so stupid. I don't know why they did it. However, if you ever do want to play this game, and you actually have it on a physical DS and you want to use magic, there is a super easy item duplication glitch that I use a lot in other playthroughs of the game, where you can just dupe like 100 elixirs in about 5 minutes. So if you really want to go that route, you can. All right. But
so
yeah,
if you exploit the game, it's fun.
Yeah, so I like this game. I do think it's fun. I think it was a great introduction to, like, you have 4 characters, you pick their classes, whatever you pick is what you pick. I do like it how none of the classes are really direct upgrades of each other, no matter where you are in the game. Like, the monk from the beginning of the game will still be useful at the end if you decide to keep your person as a monk. Like, they are just different, you know what I mean? So I think that's kind of neat. But at the end of the day, this game is really hard. You can't save in mid-dungeon, and it's so funny how the best strategy for this game is you go through a dungeon, you collect all the chests, you teleport out, and you save. Just in case you get skull-fucked by the boss.
Yeah.
Because that happens a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bosses in this game. They have this, like, what I call a fuck you move.
Yep.
Like, they'll just use it and knock out 3 of your guys in the first turn. You're like, what the fuck? What was I supposed to do about that?
Yeah. No, I understand.
It's so stupid, but yeah. So either way, diatribe aside, Final Fantasy III is fun. I do recommend you play it, preferably on a way that allows you to save mid-dungeon. Wink, wink. If you.
Yep.
But this game is fun. I recommend people play it.
So play it through other means.
Yeah, but I do think it's a good game. I don't think I have to go into the final dungeon. You all know my woes. It's about 3 hours, 6 bosses, no saving. It's fucking terrible.
What?
Yeah, it's terrible. You have to go through 2 dungeons where you have to fight a big boss, 4 other bosses, and then the final boss, who's really fucking hard, by the way, without saving. It takes about 3 hours.
So,
I did it on the DS.
Do it so funny.
Like down for beating them.
Nick,
31st.
Yeah.
Nick, I asked you to give a eulogy for the game, but you ended up just shitting on it.
I fucking buried it. Honestly, though, this game is fun. I think everybody should play it, but
good chunky RPG, you know.
But there's a lot of problems.
Yeah. So here's what we're gonna do.
Yeah.
So we
obviously
moved on.
6 is moving forward. I'm voting for 6. Just
yeah.
Okay.
I figured. So we're moving on to the final 4 here. This is where it gets tough.
Final 4.
The final 4. The final 4. We either have Final Fantasy 7 versus 8, or we have Final Fantasy 6 versus Tactics.
Oh, those both suck. But okay.
Yeah, these are gonna be hard ones. Why don't we do this? Why don't we? Because I know Alex is gonna have an impassioned speech. So let's save that. Let's do Final Fantasy 6 versus Final Fantasy Tactics.
Okay.
And Nick, why don't you start?
You want me to start, huh?
Yeah, 6 versus Tactics. Go ahead.
All right. Okay. So, Final Fantasy Tactics is an incredible game, right? It is. I mean, it basically birthed the tactics genre, as far as I'm concerned. There are some games may have come before it, and other really good ones have come after it, but this one really kickstarted the tactics genre. It has a wonderful, very intricate story that, like, it spans so many characters, and there's so much going on, and there's so much cool stuff. However, I'm afraid I'm going to pick 6 over it.
Wow.
Final Fantasy VI is an incredible game, and I'm going to tell you why. There's 2 scenes in particular I'm going to bring to light here. Okay. The first one is right after you get to the world of Ruin. Now, Alex, Will, have you played this game?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Right after you get to the world of Ruin, Kefka's done his thing. The world's fucked. It goes to Celeste, who is on this deserted island with the one she calls her grandfather. This paints the picture of what this world has become. As soon as you leave, every enemy you fight will just kill themselves in combat, which is super. Yes, they intentionally kill themselves. You don't have to do anything. Now, with Celeste, your job is to feed your grandfather fish because he's getting a little weak. He eventually dies. And then becomes one of the more pivotal scenes in this game. Celise, she jumps off the cliff and attempts suicide. It's an extremely powerful scene, and she ends up washed up on the beach. And she does survive it. She does survive it, and she questions why. But then she finds a raft, and she sails on toward where everything else is. About 4 or 5 hours later, we come to scene 2. You have a couple of your former friends with you. You've got Setzer, you've got Sabin, you've got Edgar. You start going down a place where Setzer says, all right, I got something to show you guys. This world is, he doesn't say this, this world is fucked, but I've got something to show you. He starts telling you this backstory he has with this character named Jaril. And he says, I'm not sure, fiance or whatever, they used to race their airships against each other. And she had one called the Falcon. It was the fastest airship ever built. They race, and he says, meet me back on our hill. And she says, not until I go the farthest no one's ever gone before. So you can probably guess she doesn't make it, okay? She doesn't come back. Then you get down into the bunker, and you get up into an airship. And Setzer says, we uncovered the wreckage, and I rebuilt it. And then the music stops. And then while he says, I rebuilt the Falcon, the second map theme of the game plays. This triumphant music comes up from the background, and he says, and now the Falcon may be our last hope. And then it takes off, and just as the music cascades into that high point, the airship comes soaring out of the water, and you're in the sky. And then finally, you're all talking on the airship, and Edgar says, let's do it. Finally, I have hope. It's these two scenes in a 30-hour game that maybe make up 4 or 5 hours of it that make this game an unforgettable experience for anyone who plays it. You guys can take the whole twisting and crazy plot points of tactics of 7, of 8, but Final Fantasy VI is such a genuine human experience. I take that any day of the week, and that is why I think 6 is better than Tactics.
Wow. I actually expected you to go the other direction. So after that impassioned speech from Nick, Nick is voting for Final Fantasy VI.
That's right.
So, Will, would you like to follow up on Nick's speech there?
Yeah, I mean, this one's challenging, so I have to kind of rearrange my thinking because, like, Final Fantasy Tactics was successful on so many levels, and it was just like an entirely different like piece of work than like every other Final Fantasy game. It didn't come with a Final Fantasy number on it, so it's not really, I mean, is it part of the main? Where does it fall into the main series? You have to like kind of measure it against release dates and epics and all that stuff. It's also an extremely like excellent game, like mechanics wise, and incredibly complex. And you can play it over and over and over again, and you'll have a different experience every time. The battle system is incredibly free form, and just really lets you kind of put your own stamp on it, which, a lot of Final Fantasy games kind of mainline you into certain archetypes. They give you a little bit of choice, but, this one really kind of let you off the rails, and, the better at math you were, the better at the game you were.
Right.
So, so when comparing the two, I'm like, okay, well, since they're so different, what's the better game? Which has the better mechanics? And like, I can't even really think about it that way. Where the question is, what's the best Final Fantasy game? And, from that perspective, just to put it bluntly, it's 6, because 6 had all of the emotional impacts, the maximum emotional impacts of Final Fantasy, which is the beating heart of Final Fantasy is your connection to its world and its characters on like that really visceral, personal, emotional level. Not just like I'm interested in this world. There are plenty of Final Fantasy games, like every Ivalice game, like draws you into the world and how detailed and cool it is. But the ones that really make an impact on people are the ones where you really just like get buried in this character's psyche and their stories. And
I expected you both to pick Tactics. I'm like very surprised.
I think you underestimate how good 6 is. You haven't played it, have you?
I
think you underestimate how good it is.
there's sometimes like you could say that it's not as good of a game. Like you might be able to make that argument. You might be able to say that like that's even less like more like Tactics is even more fun than Final Fantasy VI. Like some people might say that too. Some people might even like the story more in Final Fantasy Tactics, and that's a good argument to make. You know, I would actually prefer to play Final Fantasy Tactics to this day just because it's a freaking awesome game. But when you ask me what the best Final Fantasy is, and you know, Tactics would still probably beat like a bunch of other Final Fantasies as the best Final Fantasy, but
which it already has,
6.
right? Yeah,
yeah, not
right.
6. That's a tough. You can't dethrone that with what Tactics is. You know,
that's so
Tactics
interesting.
did not outdo 6 at its own game. It just did something completely different.
I expected you guys to go the other direction. I didn't think we'd have a lame duck vote here already.
Oh, we fooled the host. We did it. Will.
Yeah,
we fooled the host.
We got more personal bias here and put an objective critical lens on.
Yep.
So Alex, I mean, Final Fantasy. I didn't expect this, but Final Fantasy. I thought you would have a tiebreaker here, but I set
Final
this up.
Fantasy Tactics in here. You
yeah, dude. I purposely set this up for Alex to have a tiebreaker, but he's not going to get it. So
don't have it.
So I mean,
I'm not. I never played Tactics. We know this. There's no betrayal here. We're just burying Tactics, unfortunately.
I mean, I think you guys really took the personal story over everything else. I didn't really expect that because it's not like Final Fantasy Tactics doesn't have one. You know what I mean? I thought the story in Tactics was pretty, I don't know, I thought it was pretty emotional too. And it's pretty...
I think it just doesn't hit you on a visceral level.
I know, but it's pretty miserable the whole time.
It is. But 6 also has that light of hope that you get sometimes. It gives you both the downs and the highs.
Nick, I just want The Last of Us all the time where it's horrible the whole time. It's just miserable.
Oh, then that's Tactics, absolutely.
Yeah.
The most Final Fantasy of stories. You know, you have like the evil empire, and you have the hero party that like all the best ones. They have people coming and going, and they all have distinct personalities. And you know, you don't like all of them, and not everything is perfect. But Final Fantasy is also kind of a mess too. So there's that.
Yeah,
I think that's a good description for the entire series. It's kind of a mess.
Kind of a mess.
Yeah, like they have like weird quirks and shit that like a lot of them started in 6. So you know, you gotta love it.
So. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I thought this one would be harder, but I guess I was wrong. So
I can't believe that I'm saying this right now. Like,
yeah, I know. I mean, honestly, if I have a lame duck vote, I don't know. I want to give Final Fantasy Tactics a vote, but because I do think it's excellent.
You got to play 6, Alex. You got to finish 6.
I know.
You got to finish it, man. It's incredible.
Okay, let's jump over to the other side of the bracket. This one's gonna hurt. So I hope you guys are ready for this. In the semifinals, we've got Final Fantasy VII versus Final Fantasy VIII. These are
two reactions.
Yeah.
Will and Alex's face are just incredible.
So here's what I would like to do. Alex, this is your game, man.
Oh my god.
So I think if this is the time to give the speech. You have the Senate floor.
Okay.
You have the first say.
Okay. This is what's going to happen here. So I realized during the break that you have set me up for this. And
I did.
My two favorite childhood games. So this is the analogy. 7 is the Michael Jordan of the series. 8 is the Scottie Pippen of the series. You know, in another series, it would have been the standout game. It would have been the memorable game. But it came after 7. It stands next to 7, so we don't talk about it. You know, people hate it with good reason. It is not better than 7. But I love it. It is my favorite, and I love it even more because people don't like it.
Love that.
Actually, wait, before you finish your speech, I'm going to interrupt you real quick. For the sake of the rest of the show, I want you guys to give your arguments without voting, and then we're going to do a roll call vote.
Oh, interesting.
So go ahead. Finish your argument.
Good.
All right.
Sure. 8 to me is ambitious in all the right places. It didn't translate the way that they intended it to. The junction system, making summons into guardian forces that were more integral to the leveling system, the seed system to give you, to make you feel like you were part of an organization, and the whole, you know, different time periods, you know, past, present, and future, merging at the end, this sort of grand plan to merge time and rule everything. from Ultima Seiya. Really great idea. I just feel that and even the past memories that Squall experiences as Laguna, all amazing ideas, but they didn't really hit home, and I think they alienated a lot of people. But I think, to me, I see the, to use Nick's word before, I see the hope in it, and the way that they wanted this series to go, this entry to go, and it's, if they ran out of time or they just didn't execute properly, I see an original title that, and a story that really wouldn't happen in any other series. And for me, Nick was talking about 6, like that the scene of the Falcon. For me, that scene for me is the end of Disc 1 of Final Fantasy VIII, when Ultima Seiya, and there's even fan theories out there, so Ultima Seiya essentially kills the main character in this sort of like, Squall's arc could end there, and it would be a satisfying story where you have kind of this loner kid that is afraid of dying and is afraid of responsibility, coming to his friend's aid and putting his life on the line for something bigger than him in the course of, whatever, it's supposed to be a month or two. But to me, that's a human arc, and that I've always really connected with that. And that to me is my, I fear my eulogy for Final Fantasy VIII.
I love it, man. I love it.
So what did they say on the Senate floor? You cede the rest of your time to the gentleman from Maine, Will.
Yeah.
So, Will, now like I said, we're not going to vote. I'd like you to give your speech, one way or the other. You have your time.
Okay. Well, I guess I can't be super blunt because we don't want to reveal our votes.
Sure.
But I mean, I will say I don't think this is going to be a big of a bloodbath as we're expecting here. I have an analogy as well. It's sort of similar. I would look at Final Fantasy VII as sort of the breakout album, the edgy debut, the one that got all the fans. It's rough. It has a lot of like a new sound that no one's ever heard before. It looks incredibly cool, and it's flashy, and it's on a new system. The Final Fantasy VIII is like the sophomore album that is super experimental and nobody understands it, and loses them fans because it's not like the original. And but in reality, this is a transcendent work of art and an incredible artistic statement. As a game, it has a lot of strange systems. There's a lot of things that are different and dissonant from someone playing Final Fantasy VII, which by all rights is pretty standard Final Fantasy, with a few twists. Final Fantasy VIII kind of took a lot of the systems and turned it on its head, and even just the role-playing aspect of it was different. And I would kind of go so far as to say it anticipated games like Persona, where it really kind of put you in sort of that scholastic environment and gave you sort of a regimen, a schedule. You had assignments, you had a salary, a stipend. You didn't really earn gold the normal way. It introduced like a card mini game that was totally wacky. It had that weird mind-bending parallel story happening with with Squall and his body double. It was really difficult to understand. The environments were very, like, they ranged from like very fantasy gothic to futuristic. The world made like very little sense on like first glance. And then that's not to mention the whole premise of the plot, which was the relationship between the two main characters. Much more personal. I mean, there was still the world-saving element, but it was all just sort of a backdrop to that personal story. And that's kind of like where Final Fantasy went from there on. Like, they had these like huge globe-shaking events with the exception of 12, but they really just focused on like the characters from then on. And I think that template really got solidified with 8 because they just made these like incredibly real emotions and they just wove them into the interactions with these characters. And like when you were taking them out and making your party and fighting the bosses, you really felt like you were a member of this party, which just on the strength of just the set and the characters alone. So to bring it back to that analogy, this is a misunderstood game. This is like the real masterpiece in my mind.
Whoa! Hidden hot takes. I love that.
Wow.
Yeah, this was a game that took a lot of risks, but still maintained a kind of Final Fantasy-ness to it. It was still Final Fantasy, but so much different. And even though they didn't really try the same weird system design and gameplay approach that they did after that game, they kept a lot of elements of it. They kept the realistic characters, and they kept the sort of the romantic personal subplots, and yeah, it really, like, they took just a change in direction and took an opportunity to really even more define the Final Fantasy brand with that game, and it was just a progression rather than a step back. And from that point of view, in my mind, I'm not going to vote.
You're going to abstain. Yeah.
He's present. He's
voting present.
Yeah, he's voting present. So, all right. So, Nick, please say your piece for whichever game, for both of these games. Please put forward the arguments, and then we'll hold the vote.
So this is really weird. I didn't think there were going to be 3 analogies for this specific matchup, but I also have an analogy.
The gentleman from Massachusetts has an analogy.
So we already had the sports analogy. We already had the music analogy. I'm going to make a video game analogy.
Okay.
Final Fantasy VII is Ocarina of Time. Final Fantasy VIII is Majora's Mask. Though not quite as successful as Majora's Mask was. It's not, totally the same thing. But I think the main point still remains. The Ocarina of Time to Legend of Zelda was the game, right? This was the smash hit. This is pretty much the reason why everybody loves Legend of Zelda, is Ocarina of Time. How do you follow up? And just like Final Fantasy, what many people believe is the best Final Fantasy game is Final Fantasy VII. How the hell do you follow up what many consider the best game in your franchise? How do you do that? You make something fucking weird.
Yeah, you make an anti-sequel, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's what they did with Final Fantasy VIII, okay? What I want to say about 8 is I think it gets too much hate, personally.
Okay.
You'll read everywhere. 8, I played it very recently, of course, and I think my experience may have been helped by the fact that the Switch remaster has a fast forward button.
Okay.
I think junctioning before without that, I would have been like, this is a massive pain in the ass. Although it gets better later on when you can, make items into whatever. But Final Fantasy VIII also has the leveling system that, Greg, you and I both despise, which is adaptive leveling.
Okay.
Enemies level up with you. So It's actually better to not level up at all in Final Fantasy VIII. It's better just junction spells into your stats to make you better. It's better to not level up if you can avoid it.
Yeah, those Todd Howard vibes.
Exactly. But what I do appreciate about Final Fantasy VIII is this game is weird, and it fucking embraces the fact that it's weird. Apologies if I get the chronological order wrong, but this is how this game works. So Squall almost dies, but he doesn't. He's fine. And then he gets these memories from his past, which is actually his dad. But then he goes through. You go to the bottom of Balam Garden. It's actually in control by this big green alien dude. You're like, what the fuck? So you kill him, and then the garden can fly. So you use that as an airship. And then you get to the other world, and then Renoa gets kidnapped, and she gets kidnapped by this sorceress. So you go and visit this guy. He says, okay, we're gonna go save Renoa. She's been captured by the sorceress Adele. Yes, Adele. But Adele is in space. She's being held captive in the orbit of the moon. So we gotta go to space. And because so much weird shit has happened, the player just like, fuck it, let's do it, let's go, I'm ready. So you go to space, and then the game goes from there. It's fucking weird, it is ridiculous, but it is insanely fun. And you know what? They did a great job at sticking to the weirdness that you just go along with it. You're like, yeah, I'm in space, because I expect it. Why aren't we going to space?
Yeah,
it's fucking weird. Yeah, fuck it, we're going to space. On the other hand, though, Final Fantasy VII is really just the Final Fantasy experience, right? You get so attached, very similar to 6. You get so attached to all of these characters. They all have their own theme songs whenever they appear on screen. They all have just something going on in the background that you can solve that just really just lends into the whole experience. I do think the materia system in 7 is better than the junctioning system of 8, although it's not nearly as wacky, so you can't do as many funny things with it. I do think it's better. I think Final Fantasy VIII's weapon leveling system is terrible. I got like 2 or 3 different weapons throughout playing the game normally, I'm not really sure how you were supposed to actually do it. I don't know, but it ended up being fine. But Final Fantasy VII gives you that classic experience where you're just like, hey, you know, I'm getting stronger. I go to the next town, there's a new weapon for me. But in Final Fantasy VIII, you don't have that. So at certain points with no leveling, without finding any other weapons or armor or anything, you don't really feel like you're getting stronger, right? And toward the end of the game, I don't think it's an exploit of 8, but I found out that instead of just junctioning spells from monsters, I was able to junction, I think it's tents into like Kiragas or something like that.
All right.
I ended up, because you get so much fucking money from being, you know, the seed. You just get money like every hour, I think, whatever it is. I had so much money that I just bought, I don't know, 500 tents, and I just bumped everybody's health to almost max just by junctioning a shitload of Kiragas to everyone. And I'm just like, okay, I guess I'm max level now. The game's gonna be fine. But yeah, so I don't know. I think for that reason, I guess I am not voting until the end. But I do think the leveling and the equipment system in 7 far surpasses the development and upgrade system of 8. But I do, Greg, you've used this line before. I don't remember which podcast you used it in. I really appreciate the spirit of Final Fantasy VIII.
Yeah.
I think it set out to complete a task, to be weird, to be different, to really hit the player as a, hey man, this isn't 7 again. You're going to get something totally new. And they did it right. And I think it gets too much hate.
Wow. Okay, so we're going to take the roll call vote here. Okay.
Can I just like congratulate you on that plot summary of Final Fantasy VIII? Holy crap!
Wonderful.
Did I get the chronological order right? I don't really remember, but
I'm sure somebody
I was
in the
listening to like, how is this not the best one?
Yeah.
Oh, they're called Shumis. That's it. The little Smurf guys.
Yeah,
The Shumis.
right?
That's the name. Right.
Oh,
right,
the
right.
the Shubies?
The Shumis. Yeah, you have no idea there's any other like. You think the game is all humans, but no, these little fucking green guys show up and they're called Shumis. Well, it's fucking weird.
Yeah, the guys from Rocket
it's
Power.
So funny, Nick.
Yeah.
It's so funny that when you talk about the batshit story of 8, you actually ended, I think, halfway through the game where it gets even nuttier. And like, I just want to take a second.
Yeah.
The final level of this game, time and space are merged,
Yep.
past, present, future. You fight the ultimate sorceress, who is controlling women in present day to do her bidding.
Oh, that's right. That's what it is.
You know, like she's in the shadow government or something. Like, you know, and then you merge time and space. You show up. You're like, I'm here.
Hey, what's up?
And not only does she kill your party members if they die in battle,
that's right.
or I don't even know if
They
die
disappear
in
from
battle.
space or something. Yeah.
Yeah, they get deleted from existence.
It's like Mega Man Battle Network. They just get fucking deleted. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, like Irvine the sniper. I remember as a kid, it was like Irvine was removed from existence.
Yeah.
It's like,
Oh, dude. You know what?
that guy.
Speaking of Irvine, I totally forgot a huge thing of Final Fantasy VIII that, in terms of this specific podcast, puts it over 7. Final Fantasy VIII is the only game in the series where you play basketball.
Wow.
There's a seat on a basketball court. Irvine fucking clanks a free throw.
That's true.
That's the only game in the series where there's basketball.
I guess it's...
Dude, holy crap. Well, anyway, I didn't expect this to go that far, but anyway, let's take the roll call vote here. All right, so how does the gentleman from Maine vote?
Yeah, I just to probably clarify what I said earlier, that Final Fantasy VII was an amazing game, set so much of the standard. In my mind, 8 iterated on a lot, took more risks, and ultimately, kind of became sort of a sleeper influence for the rest of the series in a lot of ways. And really just took Final Fantasy even higher, in my opinion, so I'll vote for 8.
Wait, what?
The Final Fantasy quirk sniffer that I am.
Whoa, wait a minute, what? I almost just fell out of my chair. I was not
You didn't think I was going to vote for 8?
I was not expecting you to vote for 8. Holy shit.
I vote for 8. I'm a cork sniffer.
Wow.
Wow.
Holy shit.
Listen, like Final Fantasy VII, it's such a great game. 8 just struck me on such a more emotional level in terms of like just how the character interactions. So it's a fiery take. People wouldn't agree with me, but
Holy
I'd
shit.
vote for 8. I'd vote for 8. It was a really interesting game.
What a take.
Alex, how do you vote?
Fucking hands are covering his face.
Great. I'm just imagining like headlines of articles like gaming podcast chooses Final Fantasy VIII over Final Fantasy VII.
And I need someone to vote against me so I'm not ostracized from the gaming community.
No, I know, dude. The internet is gonna listen to this, and they're,
Holy
dude,
shit.
we're fucking toasted, dude. After this,
We're toasted after this is it. Goddamn,
Yeah.
GameCube has come to an end.
yeah, dude. I think
Yeah,
this is the
we're gonna
last
get docked.
episode.
You know, I was hoping not to be put in this position because the fate of the free world rests in my hands right now. So we're picking 8 or 7, right?
Yeah. How does the gentleman vote?
Okay.
Wow.
So I was hoping to be in Will's position where I could make a protest vote, like vote for Rocky Johnson or something.
Yeah.
You know, vote for Jill Stein or something, but I can't. I need to make the world whole, and 7 is possibly the finest game to ever be made. I think it has to be 7.
Wow. I thought you didn't pick your game. 8 is your game.
I want to pick my game, but it can't
This is
happen.
about the
Dude,
better
this
game,
is honestly this podcast. This topic
Wow.
went way farther than I thought it was gonna
Dude,
go.
these past 2 rounds have really fooled Greg.
No, for sure, Nick. Dude, I try to set this up so you don't get the final vote every time,
Well,
but it's happened again.
that's okay.
Nick, now we've debated these games thoroughly enough. How does the gentleman vote?
All right. So what I actually just came to realize is, wow, that basketball scene with Irvine is so telling of his character. He's a sniper, and he misses the shot against Adia, and then he misses the free throw. This dude sucks. Why are you a sniper?
Yeah.
What the fuck?
Well said.
What is
Well
wrong
said.
with you, Irvine? Anyway, okay. So I am like flabbergasted here. I thought the votes from the gentleman on the windows below me would be switched.
Yeah, me
That's
too.
how I thought this was going to turn out. This is super interesting. I mean, for the reasons I stated before, Final Fantasy VII is just the finer game, and I have to vote for it.
Okay. Yeah.
8 is
okay.
the good game, and it is
Dude,
misunderstood. But
I
7
just
is better.
I just wiped some sweat from my brow here because it's just like
Yeah,
I thought.
I mean-
Dude, during those speeches on the Senate floor, I thought you guys were going to unanimously vote for 8.
I was
and
just
I was-
writing 8's eulogy. I didn't mean to accidentally vote in favor of it.
Wow.
I was saying all that because I thought it was going to go out pretty easily. I didn't think I'd
Wow.
have to use it again. But I guess I don't.
So
but yeah, 7.
thank God. Honestly, thank God, because I didn't. I mean, honestly, if you all voted for 8, it would have been more entertaining in a way too. But
I
Okay.
mean, I love memes. I did vote through Crystal Chronicles and Final Fantasy III in earlier rounds. I love memes, but this is the semifinals. I need to go with the true contender and not the meme.
You know
yeah,
what's kind of
I
funny?
mean,
We haven't actually set a huge amount on 7.
No, we haven't. I think everyone's
been
saving
like-
their
No, I
marbles.
haven't.
Talking about the weird ones, which I like.
I
But,
was writing the eulogy. I didn't think I'd have to say anything about 7, to be totally honest.
no, honestly, for a second. So, just for the sake of the record, Final Fantasy VII is moving on.
Yes.
Honestly, I literally thought you guys were going to have a unanimous 8 vote. Like, I thought that's what was going to happen.
I could hear Twitter threads being created. Like, these fools really think 8 is better than... You got to listen to this podcast. These guys are off their marbles.
Dude, I thought it was going to happen. Like, Alex, you had the fate of your game in your hands.
Dude,
You had it.
dude, you literally put me in a John Connor situation, not John Connor, Kyle Reese situation where I saw the future and I came back and it was I had to do what I had to do.
Wow,
We appreciate your service, man, but like, wow, that shocks me too. I thought that 7 was a slam dunk to beat 8.
So,
So am I like not invited back?
yeah, no,
Will's
I
gonna sit out the final round.
yeah, you have to abstain. No, so we're gonna get to the final round. So we've come down to it. Final Fantasy VII versus Final Fantasy VI is the final round. I'll be honest with you, I thought it was going to be Final Fantasy VII versus Tactics. That's how I thought this was going to go.
Not while I'm on this podcast.
And for a moment, I thought it was going to be Final Fantasy VIII, but it's not. So let's do
Maybe I
this.
should have voted for 8 for the easier matchup, but
Yeah, let's do it the same way, where I'd like you guys to present your arguments. We are on a 15-minute clock here. Let's present some arguments. This is Final Fantasy VI versus Final Fantasy VII, and we will take a roll call vote to decide the winner of the entire Final Fantasy March Madness. So, Nick, if you could start, please.
all right.
Present however you choose. Just be
So-
conscious of the clock.
So, How do you hit Final Fantasy VII fans where it hurts? You say Kefka is better than Sephiroth. That's what I'm going to do right now.
Okay.
So, Kefka as a villain is better than Sephiroth as a villain. So, and this is why. Sephiroth of Final Fantasy VII. All throughout the game, you know him. He's Cloud's rival. He is powerful. And you know what he can do pretty much throughout the whole game. Kefka is a little bit different, where he is the true rise to power villain who starts from nothing. I read a very interesting interview with the designer of Kefka's character, who one throwaway line almost really determined the way that they developed him. In the second or third, I don't know, you're pretty early on into 6. You see Kefka for the first time, and he's walking in the desert with a couple of soldiers, and he says this offhanded remark that tells you all you need to know about his character. He says, "Hey, there's sand on my boots. Clean them off." Well, you're in a fucking desert. Of course there's sand on your boots. This dude has lost his damn mind. And you know from that exact instance that he's not really there. All throughout this game, you see the diabolical things that he does to not really your party during it, but to the entire world. He is the epitome, basically the definition of he poisoned our water supply, burned our crops, and delivered a plague into our houses. He literally did the first one. He literally did poison the water supply. And on the other side, you've got Sephiroth, who he's a bunch of fucking clones wandering around who kind of do a bunch of stuff. He has one iconic scene where he really influences your party. And I think that's where people kind of get hung up on why they think he's better, because he directly affects the way you play the game, not directly affects everything else going on in the story. So when Kefka gets to his penultimate point, he not only becomes emperor of this doomed world he's created, he's basically crowned himself as God. I want to just let you all know of this final battle scene of Final Fantasy VI and why. I haven't even talked about the gameplay yet, and this is why. When you get into the final dungeon of Final Fantasy VI, I don't believe this happens in any other Final Fantasy game. You have to split your team into 3 teams of 4. Okay, and you have to go through and help each other out as you go through the dungeon. Every team has a certain task they need to complete. When you finally get to Kefka, you actually set the order in which you fight him in teams of 4, right? And when you fight him, it is literally like you're climbing up a church painting set to the music of some Bachian orchestra soundtrack. And as you keep climbing and climbing and climbing, the music changes with every form. It gets more crazy, it gets more unique. And then finally, you claw your way to the very top. And what happens? The theme song to Final Fantasy VI plays, and Kefka, who has crowned himself God, just descends down from pretty much the heavens, and there he is. The guy who has pretty much ruined everything for you and has crowned himself the emperor of everything is right here in front of your face. Kefka has won. He beat you. What are you going to say about it? It is unfortunate that the battle is actually pretty easy, but that is beside my point. Symbolically, Kefka won. He did everything he set out to do. And he became probably the most powerful villain in the Final Fantasy universe, even more so than Sephiroth, who really just used his mom's power anyway. And that is my argument for this part.
Wow. Nick has like speech after speech after speech. I don't know did you prepare these?
Oh yeah. I always knew this would come down to this.
Yeah, dude, I didn't think it would come down to this. Why don't we move on to Alex next, and let's all be conscious of the clock here.
That was very convincing, Nick, I have to say. I will say this for Sephiroth, since we're speaking about villains. What makes him the villain of the series, and the reason they keep bringing him back in the remake and in Advent Children, they can't tell the story of Cloud, who is the most beloved character, without Sephiroth. And there are so many scenes that always strike me, and they're always in the beginning of the game, specifically with Nibelheim. And obviously there's the iconic scene with Nibelheim in flames. That is the iconic scene for Sephiroth, almost like the rebirth of his character. But what always struck me is the scene of him in the library underneath, I guess it's like the mansion, where he's discovering his true origin. That always struck me as, despite him being the product of this like extraterrestrial life form, he could have gone his whole life without knowing the truth, living and dying, being a soldier, not being any the wiser. And Shinra would have gotten what they wanted, Hojo would have gotten what he wanted, and the world would have there would be no Final Fantasy VII. But the fact that this man descends into madness and discovers what he really is, that to me always struck me as one of the most compelling reasons to blow up the world. Okay, the world has programmed me to be their pawn. These powerful people they've captivated my mother. They experimented on me, and they just want to use me to win their wars and to make me a model citizen to indoctrinate other people. I would rather blow up the world. And that to me that's a foolproof argument. You can't go back to being like, you know what? They kind of experimented on my mom, and they're using me for their own ends. I'm just gonna leave. I'm just gonna go back to being a normal dude. You really can't. And it's unfortunately this guy has godlike powers. But to me, I've always seen the human side in Sephiroth, and that to me is what makes him the best villain. If unchecked anger, unchecked revenge, unchecked greed, because if the average person that is wronged had godlike powers, hypothetically that it would be a Sephiroth situation. So that's to me is why he is so iconic, and why he makes 7.
Now, finally, Will, you have the last word here. We've had great speeches from the Senate floor, so you have the final speech of the night here, and be conscious of the clock, and you are ready.
Yeah, I think those are really. I agree with Alex's take on Sephiroth. That kind of applies across the characters in the sense that, Final Fantasy VII really amped up the psychodrama and gave you a hero that, the version of Cloud that exists in Final Fantasy VII is an extremely interesting dynamic character, and halfway through the game you are made to even doubt his backstory, which is an insane plot device and really kind of made you look at the character a different way. They also gave you a really personal connection to the villain in a way that other Final Fantasies didn't do before. The villain, like Alex said, had a lot of more convincing motivation. Kefka is an insane, scary person. But in Final Fantasy VII, they really brought out sort of like that personal, familial backstory of Sephiroth to the point where, Sephiroth became the archetype of villain, like the speech-making villain, the sympathetic villain, who, you obviously were fighting against him, but at the same time, you kind of doubted, like, why. And that was an extremely powerful bit of storytelling there. Final Fantasy VII also really brought you into that romance and then took away the character with the death of Eris. So those things were, told on like a much larger scale, and in a way that made it feel bigger. It was a little bit more social political than 6 was. Up until then, all Final Fantasies were basically just like vamps on the same, like rebels against the Empire, big evil bad guy. Final Fantasy VII was kind of sort of like had some environmentalism threaded in there, some anti-capitalism messages. It was completely futuristic. There was like really no fantasy involved. It took place in this really dark steampunk futuristic city. It's extremely cool. And then that was only like the first 25% of the game. All that time you spent in that like cool like underground city with like these walls overhead, and like then you destroy the whole thing, and all of a sudden you're in like a giant world, and the game is completely different. You're visiting all these different towns and cities. It really felt epic. Like that was I think one of the reasons why like Final Fantasy VII just felt so big and different, and felt like these titles to own if you were a PlayStation fan or an owner, just because it was like just so massive in scope. The story it was telling, from both the character arcs, the multiple character arcs, to like the overall save the world plot, was just like everything about it was just outsized and like everything that you would want out of a Final Fantasy game. And it was just at that time much bigger and cooler, like because it had like the guy with the gigantic sword, the anime archetype, hero, the cool party characters, and just the overall length of the game too. I think it was much longer than 6. Took forever to get through. There was just so much that happened in it, and and just all the way through, it was, maintain the same standard of quality. So I've said a lot about how good 6 was, but here's me redeeming myself with 7. Just a landmark achievement in games, and I'll withhold my vote for the floor, but that's my spiel on it.
So now we've said our piece. We have debated all of the Final Fantasy, most of the Final Fantasy games. We've gone 16 down to 1. Let's keep this very short and very sweet. Let's call the votes. Nick, your first vote. How do you vote?
Well, I think you all know how I'm about to vote.
How are you voting?
My favorite game of all time, probably. So I am voting for Final Fantasy VI.
Alex, how do you vote?
I too am voting for the first game I bought as a kid. It stole my heart then, and it still has it in Final Fantasy VII.
Will, you have the final word. Keep it short and sweet. It's 1-1. You can break the tie. What are you voting for?
I'll give it to the game that made me realize how cool role-playing games could be. 7.
So, it is Final Fantasy VII. Some might say that this was the obvious choice. For a second, I thought you guys were going to pick 8, honestly. So I feel like this podcast, I feel like for all like the rough and tumble and strange choices and games that won, it did come down to a very traditional choice. It did come down to Final Fantasy VII. You guys had great arguments for 6 and for 8, and you guys all had great filibuster speeches throughout the making of this podcast. And even though the Final Fantasy game with basketball did not win, even though this is March Madness. So yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thank you guys so much for your impassioned speeches and your arguments and debates. There's no losers bracket in this one. Even though I think the ultimate loser is what, X2? I don't know.
I'm just glad 12 didn't get farther. I love that game. It deserves better.
I know.
Tough draw at the beginning.
Yep.
Yeah, dude, tough draw. Well, anyway, I want to thank you guys again for doing this. This was Final Fantasy March Madness. I'm Greg. I was your host. Nick, Alex, and Will. We are signing off for now. Dude, honestly, for some of this, I thought it was going to go completely sideways, but it didn't.
I tried to make it go sideways.
You tried.
We all did.
This ended up being pretty traditional. Final Fantasy VII. I want to say this is a big fuck you to the remake because it's coming out in 3 pieces, and you shouldn't spend $180 on it because fuck you. Even though the first part apparently was a good game.
Pretty good.
We are going to end it there for now. I'm not going to fucking play it until all 3 parts are out. I'm not doing it. But thank you guys.
It's like No Nut November over here.
Yeah. Thank you guys. We are gonna end it for now. Thank you.